Some lawmakers don't believe Idaho's recent abortion bans went far enough. So some of them want to remove two of Idaho's 3 exceptions for rape and for incest. And you'll hear how they say some people view such pregnancies. An activist, a minister, and a dreamer. He became a leader in the civil rights movement before his untimely death in 1968. 5 decades later, and Martin Luther King Jr.'s teachings continue to inspire generations. And on this day of remembrance and service to our community, our neighbors are in need of help. And there's a chance you can step up to do that and even win tickets. Well, we knew this day was coming at the Idaho State House. Democratic Senator James Ruchte even said as much in today's Senate State Affairs Committee meeting. Someone is going to come forward with a bill to remove 2 of the 3 of the exceptions in Idaho's recently passed abortion bans. The heartbeat, 6-week, $20,000 or 5 years in prison restrictions apparently weren't restrictive enough for some Idaho lawmakers. But when first-year state Republican Senator Scott Herndon out of Sagal stood up today to introduce RS 29974, which would remove the exceptions that is, of rape or incest from Idaho's abortion laws, as Ruchte put it, it was shocking for him to see those exceptions stricken in the statute, even if it was just a proposal today. Senator Herndon introduced his RS, wrapped his idea, I should say, with the purpose of offering equal protection under the law to all, including those in utero.
It's kind of auspicious that today is Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, and his purpose was, and he spent 13 years advancing the civil rights of people based on certain characteristics. And this does the same thing. It seeks to advance civil rights based on certain characteristics. Right now, we do not have equal protection in the law based on the alleged circumstances of conception.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there with this 20-second soundbite. And we'll get to the claim that abortion bans are based on the foundation of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s teachings. We'll get to that in a moment. But the alleged circumstances of conception, like rape or incest, which are violent crimes, Senator Melissa Wintrow, who has spent years working with rape survivors, was quick to point out they just received this RS in committee, and with little time to digest it, she asked one question.
So let me be clear, what you're saying then is there are no exceptions. Let's say a 13-year-old girl was raped by an uncle, a father, a brother, and that we would force that 13-year-old to carry a pregnancy and have a child and not get an abortion. Is that what I'm hearing?
Senator Herndon went with the semantics argument, saying the state of Idaho isn't forcing anyone to do anything.
So presently, all we're doing with the legislation is that we are banning abortions in the case where a person alleges that the child was conceived in rape or incest. The state of Idaho has nothing to do with forcing pregnancy, forcing crimes, forcing alleged crimes, or forcing anybody to carry a child at all. These are merely natural circumstances. The state of Idaho does not control that.
So a woman getting pregnant from an alleged rape or incest, says Senator Herndon, is merely a natural circumstance of someone committing a crime. According to the senator, the removal of these exceptions, Idaho isn't forcing anything on anyone, just removing any choice her or her family might have in the matter. Then Senator Herndon offered another perspective on Senator Wintrow's 13-year-old rape incest survivor scenario.
Some people could describe the situation that you're talking about as the opportunity to have a child in those terrible circumstances if the rape actually occurred.
He said, yeah, to some people, a 13-year-old carrying a child to term is an opportunity in the terrible situation described. And that would be their choice that I assume they would make as a family. Well, the chair of the Senate State Affairs Committee, Senator Jim Guthrie, then asked Senator Herndon if an alleged rape or incest turns into a conviction of rape or incest, would that abortion still be illegal?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
If I could offer some clarity on that, though, I believe the reason that we have the alleged rape or incest claim is because, of course, you wouldn't have enough time to get an abortion before you could go through the court process and get a conviction for rape or incest.
Which is, of course, what we already knew, given the situation. I asked Senator Herndon for some clarification on not forcing anybody to carry a child if you're removing the options for victims of a crime. He basically said the state of Idaho had nothing to do with how a woman or child would get pregnant through rape or through incest or otherwise. But the state of Idaho does have a compelling interest in protecting innocent preborn children from having the brute force of an abortion imposed on them, he said. So back to that part about introducing the RS on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Senator Herndon called it auspicious, which is meaning conducive to success. But however, this wasn't. The committee returned his RS to him with only one vote to keep it alive, meaning the routing slip won't get printed as a bill and won't get a hearing either. So it's dead, essentially, which at the State House is merely a natural circumstance. Okay, so those weren't the only proposals offered up in Senate State Affairs Committee this morning. 3 others actually made it to be actual bills, which include Senate Bill 1003. This one would make it so government contracts or public works projects would not be offered based on how that company designates who can use what bathroom, meaning they won't be required to make accommodations for transgender people. This applies only to those using state and local funding. And then there was Senate Bill 1004, and that bill, according to Herndon, who introduced that as well, would enhance Idaho's stand your ground law and castle doctrine. Should it pass, if a person is arrested on suspicion of murder but claims they acted in self-defense, they'd be able to get a hearing within 2 weeks of that arrest. They'd call it a pretrial self-defense immunity hearing. And in that court appearance, the prosecutor would be required to prove the murder was not in self-defense. If acquitted at trial, then that person could also recoup some of their losses. Both those bills are now headed to committee for debate. Late Friday night, we learned Boise City Councilwoman Lisa Sanchez lost her seat on that city council. The decision was made after Sanchez moved out of the district she represents. That'd be District 3 in Boise's North End. Last week, Sanchez was held out of the city council meeting after her living situation was called into question, and she and members of the council say that decision came as a shock. After the meeting, Sanchez tweeted her landlord gave her 5 weeks to find a new place to live back in December. Or back in November, after Thanksgiving. She said in this market, it's challenging to secure housing, adding she consulted City of Boise staff and the Ada County Elections Office before moving to make sure she could continue her 2-year term. Okay, so what happens now that she can't continue that 2-year term? Mayor Lauren McLean is going to have to fill that open position. That will then need to be approved by City Council. We reached out to Sanchez and also the mayor, but we have yet to hear back or have not gotten a comment on this situation. Boise City Council will also be down to another member come mid-February. Former Council President Elaine Clegg, she just accepted a new job as the CEO of Valley Regional Transit. She starts that job on February 13th, so Mayor McLean is now going to have to find 2 people to fill 2 seats. All right, a lot of attention on community service today, giving back to the community, that is, helping those who need it. It's something Dr. King was passionate about. The Red Cross in Idaho is drawing attention to an issue they happen to need some help with collecting. That would be more blood donations. But it's not just about Idaho either. Joe Paris explains.
Looking to start the year off on a good foot? Maybe your resolution of helping out the community? Well, the American Red Cross has an idea for you. Donate blood.
There's always need for blood. About every 2 seconds, somebody in the United States needs life-saving blood.
Matt Oxner is the communications director for the Red Cross of Idaho, Montana, and East Oregon. He explains there's great need for blood in our region.
And this is always a little more difficult time to collect blood and meet those needs just because of severe weather this time of year. Blood drives get canceled because of snowstorms and cold temperatures. I know in Montana in end of December, about 7 blood drives got canceled then.
The reality is that blood donations save lives, and there is no real alternative for providers outside of that.
You can't manufacture blood. The only way that a expecting mom or a cancer patient or an accident victim gets that blood that they need when they're in the hospital is through the generosity of blood donors out there. And it's National Blood Donor Month. A great opportunity just to thank our amazing donors and encourage others to come out and give it a try.
And statistically, very few people actually donate blood.
Only about 3% of the population donates blood. So there's, a lot of opportunity out there for folks who've maybe never donated before. Maybe they're still looking for a New Year's resolution, and there's no better resolution you can make than, spending an hour of your day and helping save somebody's life.
Yes, the priority for Red Cross in Idaho is to help Idahoans, but blood donations in the Gem State will save lives in our neighboring areas hit with catastrophe.
Seeing blood drives being canceled down in California because of the flooding and severe weather down there. So, and then it's also, of course, flu and cold season. So it's a more challenging time for us to collect, but that demand is always constant.
The Red Cross also wants to sweeten the deal. Tell them, Matt.
We are partnering with the NFL in January. Anybody who comes out and donates blood is automatically entered for a chance to win 2 tickets to the Super Bowl. So it's a win-win. You're helping save lives, and you might get a trip to the Super Bowl.
What if for whatever reason you can't donate blood? Well, there are still many ways to help people in need through the Red Cross Blood Drive campaign.
There's still ways that they can help. They can volunteer with the Red Cross and be what we call blood donor ambassadors. And those are the volunteers who welcome our donors to blood drives, help schedule their next appointment, and just make sure that they have a great experience. So there's ways to help even if you can't donate blood yourself.
Fun fact for you, too, you can actually track your blood donation through the Red Cross. They have an app that helps you follow your blood donation all the way to a recipient. So you can kind of follow in real time the journey your blood goes through and where it ends up. And again, anybody who donates blood, you'll be entered to win a Super Bowl ticket. Of course, we know that is in Arizona.
Arizona, yeah.
We all know that.
We all know that now.
Thanks, Danny.
Yep, but that'd be a good time to spend at end of January, February. But I'd be interested in this tracking your blood, because that's so many times you get in there and go, I don't know what happens to it, where it goes. But be able to follow it and know that you actually help somebody and directly know where that went, that's pretty cool.
And it can go a lot of places, too. I was talking to one of our assignment editors, Katie, and she was saying that she donated blood here in Idaho, went to Puerto Rico.
See?
There you go.
Around the world.
Helping hand.
All right, thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
We'll be right back. All right, for a lot of people, Martin Luther King Jr. Day today is an annual reminder about our country's history. We recognize there was a civil rights movement decades ago, and we get a day off work or school to celebrate. But as you know, it's not supposed to stop there. In fact, MLK Day is the only federal holiday designated as a national day of service, meaning just because you are off the clock, not at work, not at school, doesn't mean you don't have responsibilities today. On a national day of service, you're encouraged to make your community a better place. Hundreds answered that call in downtown Boise today. The Boise State MLK Living Legacy student group, they led a march from campus all the way to the Capitol steps like they usually do, but it's back this year after a break from COVID. Andrew Bartline followed along.
Too many!
The message stands tall,
Too many!
proudly front and center.
Too many!
But the support to get here,
Peace.
that's the faces in the crowd.
You know, just being kind and human and equal.
It's personal to Jessica Lynn.
Now, I have a daughter who's African American, and I want to support, you know, the message of Martin Luther King and just make change in the world. It's time. It's been time for a long time.
Jessica is stepping into her first march because while she's always believed in the message of equality, she wanted to take this step forward with her kids.
We just moved up here from Los Angeles, and my kids were too little to do it in LA.
But old enough in Idaho to face a harsh reality.
I will say my daughter's had probably more racial slurs thrown at her here than she ever did in LA.
Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't surprise me, but it sure saddens me.
Tim Teeter's part of the old generation. An avid activist since Vietnam, he says society is still making sense of a hangover from work done decades ago.
I grew up in the segregated South, and so I can tell you that things are better that way. But unfortunately, it seems like things are starting to take the opposite trajectory, and things are starting to get worse in this country.
How important is that?
Really important. But I think you need to speak to those that it matters to.
Including Boise State MLK Living Legacy Chair, Charles Jones III.
What we need to learn is to not do things that are easy. We need to do things that are right. And sometimes things that are right are hard.
Charles sees progress as a stream of water, perhaps a trickle in the 50s and 60s. He sees it as a river today. But someday, Charles prays for an ocean.
That we stop and take days like today to remember the sacrifice of all those who came before, the activism, who bled, sweat, who back in those days wouldn't have as much support, where cops would be here against and not in support. If that means exposing your own history, exposing, yes, my ancestors were such and such for slavery. My ancestor supported the KKK. Call it out. Because once we lay it all on the table, we can say, you did it, it was then, what do we move forward? You encourage it by wanting to hide it.
Those open, crucial conversations are happening here today on the front steps.
You see those kids that carrying those signs.
Charles Taylor says
they're of all colors.
That would never have happened.
Of all generations.
In the 1960s.
Of all nationalities. That is a difference between the mindset of people nowadays and the people of those days.
This is what democracy looks like!
It's an acknowledgement that work has been done.
Now!
But in the same breath, an acknowledgement that the work isn't done either. The march is organized annually by the MLK Living Legacy Committee at BSU, and they hosted several speakers on those Capitol steps, including Charles, the Legacy Chair, who you heard from. And when you talk with these people, Brian, I mean, you hear a lot of personal anecdotes, personal stories about why people are out there, and I think that makes it a lot more tangible and a lot more real for someone who otherwise doesn't experience that and might not understand it on a personal level.
Absolutely. Thanks for getting out there and doing that, Andrew. All right. Well, we told you we would have more on Senator Scott Herndon's invoking Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on this holiday to remember the civil rights leader's birthday. Even the state Republican Party tweeting out a reference to Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail and the moral and theological tradition to defend opposition to unjust laws. That's what they tweeted out earlier today. Well, that MLK Living Legacy celebration that Andrew just told us about at Boise State University, that continues tonight with a conversation with Dr. Ibram X Kendy. He's an historian, anti-racist scholar, and the author of 6 books, including How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's a book that put the Boston University professor at the center of critical race theory discussions in Idaho's legislature for the last couple of years. In fact, the state passed a law in 2021 to ban CRT teaching in Idaho schools. Dr. Kendi has heard this about Idaho. He's also heard about our mountains. He's familiar with our blue turf and our racial demographics, which is why he told me today it's important for him to be here.
I think it's important even for white Americans, and of course, white people make up the vast majority of people in Idaho, to recognize the ways in which racism, including anti-Black racism, is actually in the end harming them too. And I think that's one of the most exciting and tragic revelations that scholars of racism have been demonstrating through research and science over the last few years, just how harmful racism is to us all.
Tonight, what should people expect?
I'm hopeful that we'll be able to talk about who Dr. King actually was, what he actually stood for. We'll also be able to talk about American politics and how in too many cases we have elected officials and even intellectuals who are misrepresenting King, just as they're misrepresenting those of us who are striving for racial justice. You know, and part of the reason why they're misrepresenting King and they're misrepresenting those of us who are striving for racial justice is to tell the truth about what we stand for, is to tell the truth that we don't stand for their policies.
You've talked about this before, this misappropriation of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, especially those 35 words in the I Have a Dream speech that people tend to just throw out there as like, we believe the same stuff as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today, in the Idaho State House.
It's kind of auspicious that today is Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, and his purpose was, and he spent 13 years advancing the civil rights of people based on certain characteristics. And this does the same thing. It seeks to advance civil rights based on certain characteristics.
This appropriation of Martin Luther King's words to promote a cause that doesn't really seem to apply to that. What do you think about that?
I think it's a double tragedy. And so, of course, King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. And unfortunately, ever since, he has been assassinated a second time by people who are literally killing his legacy, a person who was committed to human rights and civil rights and equality and justice for women. He was, of course, a champion of reproductive rights, just as he was a champion of anti-racism. But of course, people are killing that legacy. And I think it's indicative of the second assassination of MLK.
Dr. Kendi said he didn't specifically decide he needed to come to Idaho because our lawmakers wanted to fearmonger away from teaching about racism, pointing to his work as divisive. But he believes it's important for him and scholars like him who study racism to go to places and spaces where they're not even expected to be. Dr. Kendy's conversation begins tonight at 6 in the Jordan Ballroom upstairs in Boise State's Student Union building. I'm told it is filling up quickly. It is free and open to the public, but as I said, that seating is limited. All right, let's get to your comments on this final minute of the Monday show on the 208. This one right here. Let's start here. If it comes up, having a little technical difficulties. Let me see what we got here. How can we do this instead of going to the big board? Let's just go with what I sent you to the back. How about this one? The first one let's get to is, could our Senate consider rescinding the Child Protective Act that allows parents to withhold life-saving treatment from the children under the guise of religious freedom? Surely Senator Herndon is concerned about the lives of children already here, says Paula. It's a possibility, but that falls under religious freedom, I would guess. This one, Lisa, it's your responsibility to assure you're living in the district. It's not always someone else's fault, says Dave. And this last question here, what's the purpose of spending 5 minutes discussing Senator Herndon's proposed bill if it is DOA? It's a good question, but it's also worth telling you what the mentality is going in, because we know we're going to see this again. And the idea that, well, a 13-year-old should view her pregnancy from rape or incest as an opportunity, maybe you need to know that's what's being discussed at the Idaho State House. We'll see if we get to more of this. I know the Senate and the House all convene again tomorrow. We'll be back here tomorrow as well. See you then.